When Doris Day died in 2019, Hollywood expected a grand farewell. Instead, there was nothing. No service, no headstone, no place for fans to leave flowers. For a woman who had been America's sweetheart for over 60 years, the silence felt strange. Some said it was her love of animals. Others said it was her hatred of Hollywood, after Marty Melcher stole $20 million from her. But people close to her hinted at something else, something tied to her son Terry, the Manson murders, and a betrayal she never spoke about in public. With the recent release of the 2025 documentary Doris Day, The Untold Silence, and the 2026 remastering of Pillow Talk for its 65th anniversary, the real reason she wanted no funeral is darker than anyone guessed. Doris Mary Kappelhoff was born on April 3, 1922, in Cincinnati, Ohio. But sorrow had already reached her family before she ever opened her eyes. Her parents, William Kappelhoff, a music teacher, and Alma, a housewife, had already lost a child. Their first son, Richard, was born in 1917 and died in 1919, only 2 years later. So by the time Doris was born, this family had already buried one child and learned how quickly happiness could vanish. That early loss stayed in the house. Grief was quiet, but it was there. As Doris grew older, another kind of pain entered her life. By the early 1930s, her family began to break apart when her father had an affair with one of Alma's close friends. It was not just betrayal. It was humiliation. In their German-American community in Ohio, people noticed everything. In 1932, when Doris was only 10, her parents separated and later divorced. At that time, divorce still carried shame. Doris and her brother stayed with their mother, who worked in a small bakery to support them. Long before she became famous, she had already learned what it felt like to be left behind. Still, while her home life was growing more painful, Doris found something that gave her joy: dance. She had started lessons in kindergarten, and soon ballet and tap became her language. By the time she was 12, she had formed a dance duo with a neighborhood boy named Jerry Doherty. Together they performed at lodges and small events around Cincinnati. Then, in 1937, when Doris was 14, they won a citywide amateur dance contest. The prize was $500, a huge amount during the Depression. That win paid for a 4-week trip to Hollywood, where they trained at the famous Fanchon and Marco dance school. For a young girl from Cincinnati, it must have felt like the door to a dream had finally opened. Then, just as everything was about to begin, disaster arrived without warning. On October 13, 1937, Doris was riding in a car with friends near Hamilton, Ohio, on her way to a going-away party celebrating her move to Hollywood. Instead, the car was struck by a freight train at a railroad crossing. Doris's right leg was shattered. It was a double compound fracture. The bone broke through the skin in 2 places. A steel pin was inserted. She was put in a cast from thigh to toe. Her dancing future was gone. That one crash changed the whole course of her life. Instead of dancing on stages in Hollywood, Doris spent the next 14 to 18 months, mostly in bed, trapped in a small room with too much time and too much pain. Yet this is where the next part of her story quietly began. With little else to do, she listened to the radio for hours. Big bands filled the room: Benny Goodman, Tommy Dorsey, Duke Ellington, Glenn Miller. And among all those voices, one reached her in a special way: Ella Fitzgerald. Doris listened closely, sang along, and absorbed the clarity and swing of Ella's style. While her leg mended, she started training her ear and shaping her voice. What had begun as a way to pass lonely hours was now turning into a new path. Doris could no longer dance the way she had dreamed, but she could sing. By 1939, she was already singing on local radio and in small clubs. But there was one thing standing between her and a wider audience: her last name. Kappelhoff was long and unusual. Barney Rapp, one of the band leaders she worked with, suggested Day, because she had become known for singing the song day after day. She agreed. The girl who had lost dance to a train crash was now stepping into music with a name people would remember. Then came the songs that changed everything. In 1945, as World War II was ending, Doris scored 2 number-1 hits with Les Brown, Sentimental Journey, and My Dreams Are Getting Better All the Time. Sentimental Journey became something bigger than a hit. It became the unofficial homecoming anthem for American troops returning home. As we approach the 80th anniversary of VE Day in May 2025, that song is being rediscovered by a new generation, featured in the Netflix documentary The Sound of Victory. Doris was suddenly everywhere. By 1947, she made another bold move. She signed a solo contract with Columbia Records, stepping away from Les Brown. From 1947 to 1967, Doris recorded more than 650 songs for Columbia, roughly 32 songs a year for 20 years. On the surface, this was the sound of success. But underneath, life remained unstable. Her first marriage, at 19, was a nightmare. She married trombonist Al Jordan in March 1941. Just 2 days after the wedding, he flew into a jealous rage and beat her senseless because she had kissed a bandmate on the cheek to thank him for a wedding gift. In her 1975 autobiography, she wrote that what had seemed like love revealed itself as pathologic jealousy. 2 months into the marriage, she found out she was pregnant. Jordan demanded an abortion. When she refused, he beat her brutally. At 7 months, he punched her in the stomach. At 8 months, he dragged her from bed and slammed her into walls. He once drove her to an isolated place, aimed a gun at her stomach, and said he would kill her, the child, and himself. Somehow, she talked him down. Despite all that, Terry Paul Jordan was born healthy on February 8, 1942. Finally, in February 1943, 21-year-old Doris forced Jordan out and locked the doors. The marriage ended in divorce. Jordan's schizophrenia worsened, and in 1967, he killed himself at age 49. Doris reportedly shed no tears. She later called Terry her wonderful gain from that nightmare. Her second marriage, to saxophonist George Weidler in 1946, lasted only 8 months. He resented her rising fame and hated being seen as Mr. Doris Day. He sent her a cold divorce letter while she was performing in New York. Yet again, just as one part of her life was rising, another part was cracking apart. Then came Marty Melcher, whom she married on her 29th birthday, April 3, 1951. For 17 years, she believed she had finally found the stable life she wanted. Melcher became her husband, agent, manager, and producer. Through Arwen Productions, they were behind major hits like Pillow Talk 1959, which is being re-released in 4K this fall for its 65th anniversary, and That Touch of Mink 1962. He adopted Terry in 1952. But the tragedy was that, while she trusted him completely, he and attorney Jerome Rosenthal were quietly destroying her finances. Beginning around 1956, the two men siphoned away the fortune she had earned from 39 films and more than 650 songs. Her money went into failing hotels, risky oil deals, and land bonds that collapsed. Nearly $3 million vanished into land deals alone. Rosenthal forged Doris Day's signature on corporate papers. Melcher held power of attorney and could act without her knowledge. Then, on April 20, 1968, Marty Melcher died suddenly at 52 from an enlarged heart. Doris was 46 and grieving. She thought he had left behind $23 million in savings. Instead, audits revealed that nearly all of it was gone. Not only was the fortune missing, but she was left in debt, owing $400,000 to the IRS for unpaid taxes. What made it even more painful was that before his death, Melcher had used his power of attorney to sign her to a CBS television contract for the Doris Day Show without her knowledge or permission. She never wanted to do television. She was grieving, exhausted, and financially trapped. The series ran for 5 seasons and 128 episodes. In February 1969, Doris sued Rosenthal for fraud and malpractice. The case lasted 99 days in court. In the end, the judge described Rosenthal's actions as gross and outrageous, and awarded Doris $22.8 million, a record at the time. Rosenthal went bankrupt, so she never saw all of it. But the legal victory mattered. After that, she pulled back from people, grew more distrustful, and found more comfort in animals than in Hollywood. Yet, the darkest twist was still to come. In the early 1960s, Doris's son Terry had purchased a house at 10050 Cielo Drive in Los Angeles. He lived there for several years before moving out. Charles Manson, a failed musician, had tried to get a record deal through Terry's connections. Manson believed Terry had broken a promise to help his career. According to prosecution testimony, Manson directed his followers to go to Cielo Drive and kill everyone inside because he wanted revenge on Terry. After Terry moved out, Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate rented the house. They signed the lease on February 12, 1969, and moved in on February 15. On the night of August 8 and August 9, 1969, Manson's followers carried out one of the most horrifying crimes in American history. Sharon Tate was 8 months pregnant. She and 4 others were murdered. Tate was stabbed 16 times. She begged for the life of her unborn child. The brutality shocked the country. But for Terry and Doris, the horror was even more personal. He had lived there. He had been the one Manson wanted. That near miss haunted Terry for the rest of his life. After the murders, he became deeply paranoid. He hired bodyguards, underwent psychiatric treatment, and avoided crowds. Vincent Bugliosi, the prosecutor, later said Terry was the most frightened witness in the whole case. Near the end of his life, when he was dying of melanoma in Beverly Hills on November 19, 2004, he reportedly whispered one painful question. Had Sharon Tate's family forgiven him? That single line says everything about the guilt he carried. Doris also withdrew even further after that. Friends believed the weight of Terry's escape, and Tate's death never lifted from her. It pushed her more deeply into privacy and into a life far from the old Hollywood spotlight. Then, on May 13, 2019, at 1 o'clock in the morning, Doris Day died at age 97 in her home in Carmel Valley, California, surrounded by close friends. Her foundation said she had been in excellent health for her age until a serious case of pneumonia developed only weeks earlier. Her son Terry had already been gone for 15 years. Her 3 husbands were all gone. There was no public service afterward, no funeral, no grave marker, just as she had wanted. The real reason Doris Day had no funeral was not simply her love of animals or her hatred of Hollywood. It was something deeper. She had spent her entire life attending funerals in her heart. The funeral of her dancing dream after the train crash, the funeral of her innocence after Jordan's abuse, the funeral of her trust after Melcher's betrayal, and the funeral of her son's peace after Manson's shadow fell over him. By the end, she had no more public goodbyes left to give. She had already said them all in private. Her final years had been centered on animals, privacy, and a quiet life, far removed from the bright image the world still held of her. The Doris Day Animal Foundation continues her work, and in 2025, the foundation celebrated its 45th anniversary with a record $2 million in grants. But Doris herself chose silence. She had survived a train crash, domestic violence, public heartbreak, professional betrayal, financial ruin, and the terror that brushed past her son. She had learned that happiness could vanish in an instant, and when her own moment came to leave, she decided to vanish without a trace, not because she was forgotten, but because she had finally found the one thing Hollywood could never give her: peace. Subscribe to keep uncovering the truth behind the legends. Thanks for watching.